The Nvidia GeForce Titan X Maxwell was the cream of the crop when it launched back in March of 2015. With 12 gigs of memory, an aging but still very competent graphics-focused microarchitecture, and a soon-to-be ending driver support window, let's take another look back at this once great beast, and see how it's holding up as Nvidia goes to pull these cards off of life support. The information age is one of the fastest evolving and coolest times to be alive. And with the recent explosion in artificial intelligence tools, Notta is at the forefront in the Japanese market for a new type of tool that allows users to improve their attention to detail by not focusing on immediately documenting their actions. If you've ever been in a corporate or professional meeting before, there are two issues that this immediately solves. The first is a team leader having the responsibility of both directing and developing productive conversation, and also ensuring that everything is properly documented for future reference. In my experience, this usually creates a pause in the flow of a meeting or train of thought, so that a note can be written in a shared document. Or you can have someone else there to take notes, meaning they aren't fully participating in the conversation. Notta allows you to instead upload a recorded video or audio file of a session, similar to what a lot of teams are already generating for documentation purposes, and creates a summary with timestamps and additional user-definable references that can either be downloaded as a PDF or shared using a link on their app and website. If you want to increase your productivity, there are also native integrations available for the Google and Microsoft suites, Slack, and Zoom to directly share media and transcripts. Using the Notta link in the description and pinned comment will give new users from my audience a 10% discount on a premium subscription should you wish to upgrade. But even on a free tier account, you can run up to 180 minutes of transcription per month, allowing you to try the service and see if it's right for your workflow. Thank you to Notta for sponsoring this video. Now let's dive into the main video. Before we dig into the meat and potatoes of this video, I'd like to say not to forget to leave a like and subscribe, and click the bell icon so you'll be notified about all our future uploads. This review was something I wanted to do before these cards got completely shelved by Nvidia, in terms of further supporting them with their drivers. And as such, this is probably going to be one of those time capsule videos, like my last 1050 Ti video, where it's just a final look at what the card is capable of today before being fully retired. With that out of the way, let's dive into the specs of our test system, and see what we'll be experimenting with. To test the Titan X Maxwell, let's throw it into my way overkill personal machine. Sporting an i7-14700K, I don't expect that we'll run into CPU bottlenecks, but if there was a weak link in the system, it would have to be the 64GB pool of G.Skill 3600 megatransfer per second DDR4 that we've paired with this chip. The motherboard is the Gigabyte Z690 Aorus Elite AX DDR4, with resizable bar turned off for testing and the PCIe X16 lane switched to Gen 3 mode in the BIOS. Keep in mind that this GPU only supports up to PCIe Gen 3, so if you're running into issues with the card just not being detected, it's a long shot, but check your BIOS PCIe settings to make sure it's not trying to force it into Gen 4 mode. Supporting the CPU and main memory pools, we've got a plethora of NVMe solid-state drives to prevent any in-game stuttering caused by streaming from a secondary hard drive. A full list of system specs is in the description should you wish to replicate anything you're seeing in this video. Let's dive into the Titan X Maxwell and see how Grandpa is holding up. Starting off with an incredibly typical ProSci-Tech benchmark thanks to a guy I used to work with. Apex Legends performed incredibly well on the Titan X considering we tested at the ultra settings and with TSAA turned on. The average came in at 126 FPS with the 1% low at 82. This game just looked great and ran incredibly smoothly, even though I was trying to get the GPU to choke in testing. The graphics card was definitely the bottleneck because it was maxed at 100% usage with the CPU kind of just hanging out, not being stressed super heavily. Would I consider utilizing the Titan X Maxwell in Apex? Actually, I probably would just based on these raw numbers, but at the same time you'd be able to get so many more frames with a modern GPU pushing modern feature sets. Doesn't make the Titan X any less impressive, but it's important to keep everything in perspective as we continue on with the benchmarks. Black Ops 6, this time utilizing the basic graphics preset with ultra textures and FSR set to the performance mode, and the Titan X was able to kind of just thug it out with this title. even though it behaves significantly more heavyweight than you'd think it should based on its graphical presentation. Returning an average and 1% low of 86 and 59 FPS, B06 was 100% playable on this card, but it probably isn't completely optimal, and there were some weird frame time spikes here and there. The Titan X Maxwell can technically run this game perfectly fine, but it doesn't seem to excel at it at any point in time either. This would be a good first impression for PC gaming, but in the Big 2.5 I would definitely start to look at a more modern feature-rich option if you want to get into this more esports focused title. Cyberpunk 2077, another first-person shooter but this time open world, and at the low preset with no upscaling features enabled, the Titan X was once again able to put its strengths to use by rendering still very detailed models and high-resolution textures, combined with tons of particle effects and a general populace to simulate. Despite the heavy load that this game offers, the Titan was able to push 64 FPS on average at 1080p, with the 1% lows coming in at 54. This is another case of things not looking alarming when observing from the data or just experiencing the game, but I will say that if you are wanting to play Cyberpunk, then this card can do it, but it's heavily outclassed by lower end and more modern cards from any GPU vendor. Up next is our first Unreal Engine 5 title, Fortnite, and like Apex, it actually performed pretty well all things considered. At the medium graphics preset and with Lumen and Nanite turned off, once again with ultra textures, and the Titan X Maxwell absolutely crushed it despite being in DirectX 12 mode. Achieving an average of 112 FPS and a 1% low of 57, for some reason I thought that Maxwell 2.0 had performance issues with this graphics API, but I guess either a lot of it has been figured out or resolved to some extent, because this performance level is actually pretty awesome and is completely competitively viable. Would I build a new system around the Titan X in 2025 to get into Fortnite? Probably not if I was spending money to build the system from scratch. There are just so many similarly priced and way more powerful cards that simply don't carry the Titan branding, but in the situation where it's a hand-me-down component, then it can absolutely crush Fortnite, considering you have an appropriate CPU paired with the thing. The first Rage title in our test suite, and despite it also utilizing DirectX 12, things performed excellently. GTA 5 Enhanced Edition, utilizing the ultra settings with TAA and no RT in the render pipeline, saw the game perform honestly better than I've seen it in quite a few years. GTA 5, because it's an older game, just ran kind of jankily in some situations, probably because it was originally written for DirectX 9 and was just ported into DX10 and 11 on PC. However, something seems to have changed with the Enhanced Edition, because although it's actually achieving lower average frame rates than the vanilla version, it feels so much smoother to play because the frame rate isn't constantly spiking and freezing the game for a split second. With an average and 1% low of 114 and 91 FPS at 1080p, the Titan X still has it when it comes to pushing pixels in this title. And like I've said before in this video, it would perform great if you're getting it for free or cheaply. But if you're building new, it's probably worth picking up something newer that's got more features relevant to today's games, and is significantly more efficient. Minecraft Bedrock, kind of a weird game to include on a GPU benchmark, I know, but it's here because of the recent Vibrant Visuals update that dramatically increases both the quality of the pixels on screen and the computational load on your system. Despite the Titan X not being fully maxed out here, hinting at some other system bottleneck holding us back, the fact that it can push 77 FPS on average with a 43 FPS 1% low when looking like this is kind of incredible. I like the pixelized shadows of the game and how it snaps to pixels on blocks, grounding everything in this world, but also it's just a cool algorithm when I noticed it. This game would perform better with a more powerful CPU than the 14700K we've got here for testing, but even so I think it's hard to complain about because it's still performing relatively competently, despite me still being able to acknowledge that newer cards would provide a similar or better experience. Up next is a new game on our test suite and is a weird mixture of both the classic Bethesda Gamebryo engine for actual NPC logic and world interaction and physics, combined with Unreal Engine 5 for the graphics side of things. I legitimately don't think I could ask for a worst case scenario for either my CPU or GPU from any piece of software, but despite that, the Titan X still rendered an average of 48 FPS at the low preset and with FSR set to balanced in Oblivion Remastered. I noticed that this game overall didn't perform super well, but at the same time was completely playable if you're coming from a legitimate OG Oblivion experience. The 1% low of 40 indicate that there were some frame drops, but they weren't as drastic as I was expecting them to be. We never really truly hit that 60 FPS target at any point in testing, but it's certainly playable and it would be hard to complain about if it was my only option to play this title. Though there still are some long-term performance concerns that will happen on any hardware you throw at this game. Up next is another Rage title, but this time on the Vulkan API and at high settings with ultra textures and with TAA turned on instead of utilizing any upscaling technology. Red Dead Redemption 2, when you think about it, it came out only 3 years after the Titan X Maxwell released, so it makes sense that we're seeing both really good performance and incredible pixel quality. With an average and 1% low of 59 and 50 FPS respectively, the Titan X still has the ability to draw incredibly detailed scenes both in terms of texture quality and vertex and triangle quantity. The game is really a great showcase for what Vulkan is capable of, but at the same time, and like I've said before in this video, a used more modern GPU would kick the pants off the performance we're seeing here, despite this card rocking a perfectly adequate memory pool. And last but not least, Russian Life Simulator, aka Rust, performed better than I was expecting considering the game just got a massive graphics settings and load time overhaul that gives off the impression that, like Black Ops 6, the game is a lot more heavyweight than it actually is in practice. Coming in with an average of 86 FPS, the 1% lows of 37 indicate some stuttering at times, but this wasn't super consistent or repeatable, and seems to be kind of pseudo-random depending on what's going on in the game world at the time. Admittedly, this was at the lowest graphics settings, with textures set to high and without any upscaling. This is a limitation of the Titan X Maxwell if you're coming from a modern viewpoint, where you're expecting these advanced software features, and this card just doesn't have them. This might make the Titan less appealing for this particular game, but as is, there isn't much to complain about besides the occasional stutter here and there. The silicon at the heart of this card is the fully unlocked Maxwell 2.0 based GM200 400A1 graphics processing unit. With 24 streaming multiprocessors, these are the actual cores of the GPU if we were to abstract everything from a 1,000-foot view. Inside each SM are 4 warps, which are SIMD units that perform the actual arithmetic computations for all the geometry and pixel shading that you see on screen. Each warp is capable of either 32 floating point or 32 integer computations at a time, giving the Titan X the ability to crunch 3072 numbers at a time if you want to count strictly FP32 or Int32 performance. Each SM also contains 8 texture mapping units or specialized buffers and their associated circuitry for quickly accessing textures, and 4 rasterization operation pipelines which actually perform the final pixel value computations. At stock clock speeds, this equates to just over 209 gigatexels per second and under 105 gigapixels per second of throughput. This is very strong and means that this card is able to process 209 billion individual texels, or pixels that make up textures, when mapping them to render geometry through pixel shaders. And it's also capable of actually drawing just under 105 billion pixels per second to your screen. This is an enormous amount of pixel processing hardware, and it's all needed to appropriately map textures and then fully compute pixels after geometric transformations and shader operations. As a general downside though, there is no special AI data type support for this card besides FP16, but it's at a ratio of 32:1 in terms of single precision to half precision floating point accelerators. This means no TensorFloat 32, even though it's 19 bits long, no BrainFloat 16, no FP8 or FP4, or whatever them AI kids are utilizing in their TensorFlow models these days. You can still revert to running models with regular single precision floats, but it's technically not as efficient or performant as just using built-in accelerator blocks. Supporting the actual compute circuitry inside the SM is a 48 kilobyte private block of L1 cache, and I'm not able to find any information about how this is divided, besides it being labeled as Unified L1 or Texture Cache in the documentation. Later Nvidia GPU architectural white papers, beginning with Pascal, started to become more specific with how the L1 cache operates in terms of how it handles both data and instructions. Further supporting the level 1 caches, the card is equipped with 3 megabytes of shared level 2 cache, and it behaves similarly to how an L3 cache functions on a CPU in terms of being available to all the cores at any particular time and where it sits in the memory hierarchy. This cache capacity is very restrictive, meaning that most of the data transfers and requests will fall onto the DRAM interface, which is incredibly strong for 2015 standards, but is kind of anemic when compared to modern lower-end offerings with half the total number of controllers and physical layers. With a total of 12 memory controllers on die, equating to what we'd call a 384-bit interface clocked at 7 gigabit per second, this card delivers well over 336 gigabytes per second of bandwidth to the GPU cores. And this is, in fact, a double-sided clamshell memory design, meaning that there are memory chips on both long sides of the circuit board, overall indicating that this card has the ability to utilize high-resolution textures and particle effects. And after running some tests, this card has very strong texture mapping and processing capabilities, even though it's 10 years on from release. The 12 gigs of memory are really holding things down, even if I do agree that the actual compute capabilities of the card are starting to get a little long in the tooth when considering how modern GPUs are typically utilized. Clock speeds on this GPU are variable depending on the load, but come in much lower than what we see nowadays on any sort of discrete graphics solution. With a base clock of 1 GHz and an out-of-the-box boost clock of 1089 MHz, this card under the configuration that we've got it in, I'll explain it in a second what you're seeing on screen, actually hit 1190 MHz without doing any tuning in MSI Afterburner. In my first review of the card, I was able to push almost 1.4 GHz sustained under load with the same Kraken G12 setup. But for some reason, the card now crashes the system when I adjust any slider to beyond its stock value. It's still an absolute beast of a graphics card despite this, but this explains the lower clock speeds combined with the same aggressive cooling solution that I'll now explain. When I got this card, it was actually from a water-cooled server farm in Texas. The card I ended up buying was on discount because it was physically lacking the shroud, and the description said that it was missing a fan. Well, they ended up sending a replacement fan along with the rest of the heat sinks, besides the actual shroud that physically surrounds the heatsink. I tried to make it work, but not being able to direct airflow from the fan was a huge issue that I was just not able to overcome. I ended up using this NZXT Kraken G12 that I bought my freshman year of college for a GTX 1080, to both keep the thing cool so I could push it for testing, but also I was curious what it would push to with thermal limits being removed from the main die. It's still pretty impressive, boosting currently to just under 1200 MHz under load, but it's still 200 MHz shy of what I was able to push with it with the same configuration when I last tested the card.